Good evening to all. I am Dr. Kumaraguru, working as a conservation scientist on behalf of BCF, NGO based at Tamil Nadu in India, with the vision is visualizing society for promoting and assisting healthy coexistence of human and wildlife and ultimately ensuring conservation of biodiversity. So, strategic implementation of this session draws us to handle research and reaching stakeholders in synchronized manner. Our research includes from ants to elephants, and exploring effective management practices in the perspective of biodiversity conservation. With our wide research expertise team, we are able to work from Nagapattinam to Valley of Flower Himalayas, stretching across different landscapes and different people and very dependency on the ecosystem. In nutshell, we connect nature with people, people with nature. So let's get connected today also in the virtual platform to existence and experience nature in enhanced dimension. Thank you all. Thank you for joining today BCF International Webinar.
Good evening to all. BCF is celebrating Big Cats Week on this occasion. On behalf of BCF India, I am very happy in introducing our today's speaker, Dr. K. Ramesh, Scientist E, Wildlife Institute of India, and also serving as an adjunct professor, University of British Columbia, Vancouver. Dr. Ramesh has completed his forest ecology and environment at Wildlife Institute of India and Forest Research Institute, Dehradun, India. He is expertise for more than 24 years in landscape ecology, conservation biology, ecology and management of large carnivores and peasants, conservation breeding and reintroduction, wildlife population monitoring, etc. Sir is having a broad expertise at WII for ornithology and as well as for landscape ecology, habitat ecology, wildlife management, remote sensing, GIS, human-wildlife conflict management. He stretched his experience in the Himalayas, floodplains, semi-arid regions and central India, Southeast Asia, including Cambodia and Malaysia. He was the first recipient in the country for the project of tiger and associated species study in terre art landscape. He was a pioneer for the reintroduction of tiger in Panna Tiger Reserve, Central India. He was associated on conservation breeding on Western Kangaropan in Himachal Pradesh. He has established a state-of-art landscape ecology and visualizing the laboratory for the National Mission on Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystem. He worked for the Indo-US collaborative project on wireless sensor communication too. Currently, Sir is having ongoing projects across the country, few of them to highlight here. Population recovery and long-term monitoring of tigers in Panna Tiger Reserve and other low-density reserves in India. Development of integrated landscape management plan in central India. Movement ecology of tiger for conflict reduction and landscape management in Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, southern India. Assessment and management of climate change effects on wildlife species and ecosystem for development, adaptation and mitigation strategies in Indian Himalayan region. He is also expertised for eBird, that is a drone technology for tiger reserves and wildlife sectors he introduced during the 2013. With this expertise, it was highly helpful for the surveillance, monitoring control tool and as well as for the capacity building of the frontline staffs for species and habitat protection and including the human-wildlife conflict management too. Dr. Ramesh has won several awards, to highlight few of them here. Distinguished Foreign Scholars Award by US Regional Association of International Association for Landscape Ecology during 2002, NASA MSU Professional Enhancement Award by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Michigan State University. Sir is a member for IUCN, Species Specialized Survival Commission for Galliform Specialist Group and Reintroduction Specialist Group, a member for Wildlife Commission on Protected Areas. He is also serving as a member for Commission on Ecosystem Management. With his expertise, he is helping for the students and around having 60 research publications and 35 technical reports and guided nearly more than 15 students. We are happy to stay connected with you, sir, in this fine evening and to listen more on new frontiers in big cats. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Vanakkam. So, it was a very elaborate introduction. On this occasion of the Big Cats, so I compliment every one of you and thank the BCF for getting me here and trying to connect with all of you. And so this is going to be hopefully a very useful session for you. So in my talk, although it is structured in terms of new frontier and big cat conservation, but the primary focus will be on conservation through active recovery, because that is emerging to be a very unavoidable conservation situation. So we need to really understand why we have to do this. Along with it, there are a lot of developments, whether doing conservation breeding, captive animals then rehabilitated, and use of technology, and so on. So you all know, I mean, I don't need to talk very much about tiger. It's our charismatic species. I mean, this is probably also one of the very few species which act both as a flagship as well as umbrella species when it comes to wildlife conservation general. Even when the Project Tiger was launched, it was started as a species specific program, but it had the larger agenda of ecosystem management. So tiger is an important species in terms of its aesthetic, aesthetic, ecological, economic, ethical values. So many of us who are working on the species would know why tiger continues to be a key species. So today, we know that whatever the tiger population that we have, it's only in around 6% of the historical range. So that itself is a huge message to all of us. We have lost so much of over 90% of historical range. Then you can imagine if you have 5,000 individuals in the world, what might have been the population if you had remaining 94% of the historic range was active. Clearly, we have lost much of the species range, along with it, the huge population. So given that tiger is a top order predator, having lost so much of a range and the species population is not a small event. It has got cascading effects across. Even in India, you can see, I mean, with respect to the human population density and the range decline, we had much of the country covered by tiger range, but now it's restricted to some landscapes like northern landscape, northeast, central India, western Ghats. So even the contiguity of the forest also got reduced. So they're all in a fragmented population. So I think some of you probably want to really know why tigers are more vulnerable to extinction than other species. There are clear reasons to why they are. One of the things is that they have very specialized life history requirements. They need to have intact forest, undisturbed forest. Only then the female tigers will breed. So they need a large home range. They need a very selective prey. The prey has to be large in size. So these specialized requirements make them to be looking for very special condition. If those conditions are disturbed, then they're bound to be vulnerable to extinction. The other important thing is about the conflict. Because it looks at large prey, it's very often about 20 to, some cases even 40% of prey is constituted by livestock. So when the livestock is taken, then naturally people are going to be reacting. So one of the immediate way people do it, poisoning them. When they poison, then obviously not only the tiger which actually caused the kill would lose life, along with it, the other animal which also share the kill, maybe this family member, would also lose his life. So other one, which is something that can be dealt with, if there is a strong law enforcement and other mechanism, is a poaching. I think when we talk about tiger conservation, we need to look beyond the species. As I said earlier on, even when the Project Tiger was launched in the year 1973, the 8 tiger reserves were actually created. So these tiger reserves enabled the recovery of tiger population, but then it was also helping simultaneously. Even in the document, the Project Tiger document, if anybody has a chance to look through, it says tiger is taken to serve the larger conservation agenda, also the safeguarding the local community's interest. Therefore, it should not be seen as only animal-centric activity. It was a conservation activity which has its mandate also to look at the community welfare. Other important thing when it comes to India is that even though we are reduced to 6% of its historical range, but whatever the tiger population that we have today, about 70% of them are living in India. Okay. So, which basically indicates that India has been doing quite well when it comes to tiger conservation. It also indicates India has got huge responsibility in terms of making sure this particular species survives. We need to see in this particular thing the new frontier. When I said, while we have lost so much of range, the connectivity is getting lost, and whether it's poaching, conflict, we are losing species population. There isn't opportunity for animal to naturally colonize. So active recovery becomes an option. But before going into this active recovery, why such a strategy, which may be expensive, technically demanding, why it's required? Many of us know this classic example of top order cascade effect. So Yellowstone National Park is given as one of the example when the area lost wolf for hunting, then when elk and moose population kind of grew exponentially, putting pressure on the vegetation regeneration. When the wolf was reintroduced again, the situation was reversed. This is one example. I mean, a lot of discussion, debate on whether this is a kind of a very directional outcome. But then one cannot deny when you remove the topwater predator, the herbivore populations go unchecked. When the herbivore population go unchecked, it puts pressure on regenerating vegetation. So those vegetation which already grew up, it may not face a problem, but then the regeneration will get affected. When the regeneration get affected, then particular vegetation remains stagnant. Gradually, the whole collapse happens. So this is whether we have a scientific evidence or not. It's logical to understand this. So in India, while we talk about tiger to be our key species, we have been having so much setbacks also. So earlier on, as I said, before the tiger, the project started in 1973, the tiger population in India collapsed. So we were down to less than 1,000 individuals. But then active efforts made sure that we have, we could bring back whatever we lost and enable the tiger population to continue to survive. But similarly, in situation like Sariska Tiger Reserve in 2005, when we had the major news that all the tiger that lived there got extinct. It is not a small event in the conservation history of India, because not only we lost the tiger, it also gave huge message to the conservation agenda or conservation discourse that India has been having. So because of that, it called for detailed investigation, even by the highest authority of the country. Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he was a prime minister, upon hearing this news, he did not lose time. He immediately drew down to Ranthambore Tiger Reserve to inquire about it. So while inquiring, so it emerged that the situation, what we see in Sariska Tiger Reserve, was only the tip of the iceberg. So this is a situation everywhere. Therefore, it really calls for complete overhaul of system and trying to fix the gaps. So he immediately set up a high-level committee headed by Dr. Sunita Narayan, who is heading the CEC, Center for Environment Conservation. So she had a established or some of the reputed officers and scientists. They came up with an excellent report within a 6-month time. It's called Joining the Dots. The Joining the Dots went into all the details of the problem, not only Sariska, across the country with the conservation. One of the things that happened was during this process, instead of having a Project Tiger, there was a need to establish an authority. So National Tiger Conservation Authority actually took birth after Sariska debacle. And they also recommended when situation of this sort happen, when there is no opportunity for natural recolonization, we have to reintroduce tigers. So it became a new advice, which was not there earlier. But then it happened as a response to Sariska. But while the Sariska issue was addressed, we also experienced another issue or another site in Panna Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh. So tiger extinction happened simultaneously in both the places. This definitely had to be, it's very serious concern for all of us. And the government obviously was very particular, both the central government and state government. So I think this whole thing has started moving in a very different situation. While the first choice would always be to protect the existing population, having to come to this kind of situation where we need to reintroduce, become a new option altogether. But some successes have given in both in Panna, Sariska, to the management that yes, if there are situations like this, they have mechanism, but one should not be complacent. So my experience, although we've been working at the Wildlife Institute, both Sariska and Panna, but Sariska had slight slow start. I mean, even though it is also a successful site as of today, but initially the tiger recovery, the population growth was very slow. It took almost 5 years. But in Panna, the recovery was much faster. And a lot of it, even today, the lessons being talked about from Panna. Therefore, I thought talking through the Panna, where I have a close connection since 2008, and where there's a lot of success indicators, which is taken very seriously both by the state, national government, as well as other neighboring countries. So it might be helpful for all of you to understand what could be the kind of situation, how things got turned around. Panna is located in central India and Madhya Pradesh. Even within Madhya Pradesh, it is a part of the Vindhyan Hill Range. So it's a dry deciduous system. And we have about core and buffer areas as typically you have in tiger reserves. But initially it started as a sanctuary way back in 1975. And it became National Park in 1981. And then as tiger reserve in 1994. So we have excellent mix of forest in terms of dense forest, mixed forest, teak, Anagesis, pendula, bamboo. I mean, it is a beautiful mix of terrain and vegetation in Panna Tiger Reserve, and also changes again beautifully across season. So there are sensitive elements for season, so it actually shows up the whole landscape. As you see here in this picture, it's a snapshot of Panna Tiger Reserve with the dry deciduous system, escarpment, and trees like a savanna type. Some of this plateau, huge plateau, grasslands with scattered trees resembling some of the savanna trees in Africa. And it has got a steppy landscape. So you have different steps with 90-degree escarpments. This escarpment has unique microclimate condition which allows animal to feel secure. In fact, many of the tiger breeding that happened in this particular landscape was actually from these escarpments. So the escarpments provide the sense of security. So because of which this diversity of this land forms, Panna has got huge diversity of vegetation types and fauna and flora. The Kent River is a perennial river. I mean, although you don't see a perennial, when it's in even this picture, when you see the water is there, beyond which you see dry, this maybe where a channel is created. But then this river is made of a lot of loose rocks. So in some section, even the water goes below and pop up somewhere else. So there's a connectivity of the water continuously is there. Because the nature of the terrain, so it may not be highly diverse in terms of biodiversity, aquatic biodiversity, but then it is a lifeline for this particular region. As I said earlier on, habitat diversity decides species diversity. Habitat heterogeneity in terms of what kind of life habitat types or their terrain or vegetation, you would see the different species and what kind of species that can be. So in Panna, even though it is a dry deciduous system, we have huge collection or diversity of different species. Key species, as you know, tiger, leopard, hyena, sloth bear, and wolf. Caracal supposed to have got extinct recently, we still don't know. So you have huge diversity of mammals, and plants and others. Wolf and hyena, it's already there. So coming to the core discussion on what actually happened in Panna is that, see, Panna when it started off, it's one of the low density areas. But as the management started providing more input in 1980s and things like that, 85 onwards, with the village relocation program, which kind of created more secured spaces, tiger population started recovering. By 2001, the tiger population was really in high density. There were over 30 tigers as been recorded by earlier researcher. But then after 2003-4, there's something happened. There's so much issues in terms of poaching, some insurgency issues there, some misunderstanding. Collectively, the population started showing downwards, and eventually it became extinct. But then the extinction had its share of its controversy. While the population was declining, there were people who were not accepting that, the department probably couldn't believe that the population could crash this much and go to extinct. They thought maybe the decline could be reversed. But the researcher, one of the researchers was working there, could actually demonstrate, yes, there's something happening seriously. But then that time the methodology was not well evolved, even though camera trap was first introduced in Panna Tiger Reserve, because Panna Tiger is one of the 6 or 8 sites which Dr. Karan started experimenting camera trap. But they were experimenting in a very small area, so about 300 square kilometer area, so they couldn't be very conclusive. So many experts who came and went, so there were a lot of mixed responses. Therefore, it's a totally confused situation. That is when I got introduced to Panna Tiger Reserve in 2008 as a part of the team investigating the reality. So we did a preliminary assessment and found out the tiger population gone down to 1 to 3. So by the time we finished our work, it was 0. Even the one animal that we photographed lost was also gone. So the picture that you see, 2006, this animal was captured, and 2009, we captured as a part of our work. But by January, it disappeared. I think by February end, we couldn't see any sign of them. So no other capture of tiger happened. So functionally, it became extinct. So this was the last evidence of tiger. So this clearly calls for a relook. And yes, the government was well ahead in terms of looking at the concerns, and they gone and proposed translocating animal from other areas as a part of the recovery process. Unlike Sariska, where we knew the tiger all got lost and it called for new recovery, but in this case, there were few animals, so the proposal was to augment. Now, coming to situation, see in conservation biology, IUCN provided a kind of a guideline. This is something that I would like all of you to just take note of. This is applicable to any conservation situation. Whenever anything happens, one must really look at what is the current situation, whether it is animal population decline, or is totally gone extinct, or functionally extinct, or congregations happening, whatever that may be. So you can place each of those into conservation situation and then decide what is our goal. Is the goal is to recover the whole population or rebuild the population? What might be the goal? So you need to set the goal. Here, we need to again see this is our goal. Suppose we have lost the tiger population. Our goal is to restore them. We need to really see, is there any alternative? What are the alternatives? What are the options? Is there any closely located population which has good connectivity, can come or colonize, so that it becomes self-sustaining population on its own without our intervention? If not, translocation is an option. So when you have these two situations, in evaluating alternatives, we need to see what are the feasibility. Is there any feasibility for animal to come on their own? Is there any feasibility for us to translocate? So you have to look at that. Once you have the choices made, then you need to also look at the risk. What kind of risk? Even if I translocate, will it survive? Will there be any problem? So we have to go. I think this is something that it's more practical in every life situation. We can always look at it. Okay, this is my option. These are my risks. Then you decide to translocate. Once you decide to translocate, then comes the whole list of design and objectives and actions. Even at each of the step, then you need to look at what is the feasibility. Okay, when I'm designing, okay, this is a structure I'm having. Is it feasible? Or does it have any risk? These are the things that one must ask. Once all this have been taken care of, then do the implementation. Once you do the implementation, then monitoring. So monitoring outcome is one side you start disseminating, sharing information. Okay, this is the outcome of whatever we introduced, but it also goes back as a learning, a feedback into the whole system again as adaptive management strategies. Okay, so even the outcome or also can be looked at overall. Is there any risk? Okay, I have now grown the population. What is the risk here? Now maybe the population's grown so much, there may be infighting, there may be conflict, there can be increased poaching. So I think all of them have to be looked through. This particular slide is very important for many of us who are into conservation or even any other situation you are in. So reintroduction of the species generally refers to release of individuals for conservation purposes. These days, even the term is called conservation translocation. I use and even change this term. We do a translocation for conservation. It is not translocation for fun. Earlier, people used to translocate for game hunting. Even today, some of this population which is managed privately, like Hubara Bustard in Saudi Arabia, UAE, so Arab Emirates actually. So they've been breeding them and releasing them. There are also places I know, bobwhite quails in America, they've been used for hunting. But now this is clearly for conservation. So reintroduction also gets into three situations. One is supplementation. So this is a situation where individuals are still there. There could be lower number or they will functionally extinct. When I mean functionally extinct, what I mean is that you may have all the males, all the females. So there's no point. They will not grow at all. So just numerically you have them, but then they are not functionally a population. They're extinct. So in which case you need to add some animal. So basically supplement them. Sometimes you have a population which has got everything, but then highly spread. It might collapse anything. So add genetics. Then you have true introduction where you have situation like both Sariska and Panna where tiger population got totally extinct, translocate them. The other one is introduction non-native habitat. The people have been done. During the earlier time, the British, when they were traveling all over, they've actually introduced many. Even today, whatever the peafowl population that you see in UK, they all introduced because much of the pheasants are all from Asian origin. So anything that you see outside Asia is all reintroduced. So you see, Kalich pheasant introduced in Hawaii Island. We have many of them introduced animals. So those are things that were happened in the past. I don't think that is happening now because the conservation professionals are very active and everything is being now questioned. You have to have very rational decision. So in terms of reintroduction, it is not a very simple step. I mean, you needed to follow certain protocols and that needed to be ensured because both IUCN as well as national government have its own protocol. Once you set your goal and objectives, there are stages that you need to really see. There's a pre-release stage. Okay, you need to really find out background situation, feasibility, look at our facilities, what we have, manpower, resources. All of them have to be thoroughly understood. And also the social acceptance and the political will. Any conservation program which have not looked at all this aspect will definitely face challenges. We will have problems. We have experienced some of this in Satkosha when our pre-release strategy stage was not as foolproof as we thought it was. So then it comes to the planning, preparation, release stage. You basically translocate, capture them. Where do you capture them? What animal to capture them? What is the criteria? All of them. Then once you do this, post-release, because any conservation program is as good as or as bad as the post-release monitoring. If you release any animal, if you don't monitor, you can either call it totally success or totally failure. You don't know. So it's very important actually to have it monitored and periodically reported. Very important. Although people talk about conservation world, now we are basically doing a noble work. Now we are working with selflessness. But when you really wanted to make things work, money matters and commitment matters even more. So budget has to be really thought out and set aside. Otherwise, it'll just become one-off work and it can always reverse into bad if things are not continuing. Other important, which many of us, including scientific institutions, conservation agencies, individuals who are aspiring to be part of some big success stories, often fail to recognize is the role of exit policy. Any program of any nature, if you really want it to be successful, you want that to continue even in your absence. Only then it is real success. If any conservation action is dependent on either leader or somebody, some situation, some institution, it is not a sustainable conservation program. Therefore, from the beginning, there should be a strategy to make sure this program is owned by the local government or the local leadership, and you find your own way when to exit and move on to next one. So it's very easy to say, but then many of us get emotionally attached and stay connected and also try to get mileages, but it doesn't work that way. If you really want the program to successful, you need to identify your space and stay to it. Not, I mean, even though there may be temptation to pull, to center play or other roles, or sometimes you may be ignored, but it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you are there and you want to be watchful and want to make sure conservation works. So some of the science behind conservation is that when you are talking about tiger reintroduction, any of them, you need to come up with what it is going to happen. Some kind of futuristic prediction has to be made. So thankfully, we have excellent database on tiger demography, its population size, excavation, things like that. There is some customized softwares are available these days, Vortex and Ramas, where you can run the population viability analysis, which looks at what will be the population growth in different scenarios. So you can run this model using different situation and decide based on this model, okay, this is the model I want. So you basically make your effort accordingly. This is exactly what we did in both Sariska Panna and other places too. And then comes the most challenging aspect of capture. So even if you have decided, if you have manpower, so tigers are not any other animal you can't just go pick up. So you need to identify the right animal, you need to capture it. It involves chemical immobilization. You need a professional veterinarian who can do this. And so Madhya Pradesh in that context is well set up. So we basically managed to capture this animal, and different people are involved in different time scale. Animal captured, and these animals were transported, and sometimes even through helicopters. These are all some of this new thing that happened in India. I don't think we never kind of had this kind of involvement of sophistications and professionals to transport animals and things like that. So I think the Panna and Sariska models opened up a new frontier in terms of the tiger conservation, how one can do and things like that. It's a lot of lessons, a lot of mistakes, but then everything is worked out successful with all the good and bad. But now we are in a position to really guide the process at most professionally. So I think this is how we started with. And yes, the other thing is about technology. When you do translocation like this, you need to really find out what kind of technology. So radio telemetry is one which is evolving, but with the tiger and this kind of program, we actually had to use a highly sophisticated technology, which is involving both satellite or GSM. These days, even GSM network, that is mobile network, is available. So radio collars, sophisticated radio collars are coming. You can place it on animal while capturing the tiger. You put the radio collar. Once you release it, the radio collar gives you a signal to monitor this animal. So it becomes so useful, because when you're monitoring animal, you need to really know what is happening. Without monitoring, you will not have any idea of your conservation project. Once you capture and transport it either by road or even a helicopter, so there are certain release mechanisms. So usually you keep some soft release facility like this enclosure that you see, where you keep this animal under observation of minimum 72 hours, because usually when you sedate a tiger and chemically immobilized, so they do have some drug effect, or sometimes they get injured. So in order to keep them under observation, you do this. So this is how the structure has been evolved. It was kept there. And then you release them after a few days, or sometime you can, but then we experimented both soft release as well as hard release. Both work, but though it is generally recommended that you at least have some time under observation. Suppose if you see animal is very active, no injury, no sedative effect, I mean, one can even release hard. Hard release means you can just release it as it is, just bring the animal and release it wherever you want without having to keep in captivity for some time. An overview of this whole issue. So as I said, started with 2008. So the local elections happened in 2009. So initially, in the part of the phase 1, 2009 to 2014, there was, we were supposed to translocate 6 tigers, but we managed to translocate one more because that got added as later as a 7th animal, because there was one animal got stayed into Bhopal. So in the 6th animal, originally it was supposed to 2 male and 4 females, but then we knew that during part of the work there was one transient male that really contributed. So instead of bringing more male and we brought female, there were also options limited. See, it's all now easy for us to see how things have developed, but during the formative phases, it was not easy. Even within the tiger reserve, even within Madhya Pradesh, when we had a lot of tiger, so the reluctance for tiger to be translocated. So the department had to really look for whatever the option they had. Initially, both the female came comfortably. I mean, of course, not comfortably. One of the animal faced resistance from people. They said that the tourism zone, should not be lifted. So a lot of protest. That is why they were airlifting this animal. Then the male, we took about 45 days to capture in Pench Tiger Reserve. It took a lot of time to capture. So it was brought. After that, it was a different story. The further choice was limited, but then there were orphaned cubs raised in captivity and later in semi-wild condition became a choice for us. So even though I was not very fully involved in terms of the decision, because I did not feel comfortable, but then it again provided a new option. So once this became successful, I started thinking, many of us who were involved in this program started thinking that, yes, in the worst case scenario, there are one more option. So the other frontier in terms of tiger conservation. If there are many such situations in India and abroad, Cambodia, Laos, many other countries have lost tigers, but they don't even have wild population to support. So what do? So even if you translocate tigers from somewhere else, they cannot keep on translocating tigers, for as number of time as you want. So maybe conservation breeding and then rearing them in the captivity and semi-wild would also is going to be one of the option in the tiger conservation, or maybe for big cat conservation generally. See, we are facing this. If we had really good captive population lion, probably Kuno would have got lion by now. If we really had a very good conservation population of cheetah, India would have probably got cheetah. Even though conservation breeding program is not one of the first choice, or it is not generally people like it. But in situation like this, when you are not able to have headway, these options are available. But these options should only be the last option, should not be considered as the first option. Then between 2015 to 2020, it's a consolidation phase. Even though such a tiger conservation program, active program, is generally visualized up at 10, 20, 30 years time scale, but we went 5 years phases. But in Panna, fortunately, the success was much faster than expected. So we were only focusing on consolidating. So it is kind of exit time for us. So Wildlife Institute of India is part of this technical team, would be withdrawing itself from the tiger recovery, but then we'll focus on other issues like conflict, capacity building, and things like that. So this is a new, when I said a new frontier, this picture marks an important event in the conservation history of India. So this is a tiger cub rescued at 3 weeks old by one of the researcher, Joseph, in the picture, as a researcher from Wildlife Institute of India and Connaught Tiger Reserve. They were studying the tiger. One of the female was radio collared. It later, became pregnant and produced 3 cubs. So while they were monitoring, they found one day this had a mortality signal. They went and investigated it and found the mother found dead due to some infighting. But these 3 cubs became orphaned. Now this orphaned cubs becomes a kind of a dilemma. I call this manager's dilemma or conservation dilemma as a scientist dilemma. So what do you do? If in terms of natural selection, you leave them on its own, but you obviously know that it is not going to survive, then you can't leave it. So it's basically to
You need to share
rescue
your
it.
slides again.
This is what they've done.
Please.
This is exactly what they've done. And the cat, rescued it. You can see it, they're handheld and kept this small building that you see here. This is a small quarantine facility. We are now hearing in COVID, quarantine everywhere. So basically, the one that you see is a quarantine facility that was kept for really long time. You can see from the time scale. June 2005 to February 2008. It's almost 2.5 years. You can imagine an animal rescued at the age of 2 to 3 weeks and kept confined in that environment, and it could be translocated while it's not a small event. And initially, we were all reluctant, but it has also opened up new avenues, as I explained earlier on. So later on, these two female became choice for Panna. So with some discussions, reluctance, it all came to Panna. But fortunately, both had initial difficulties and then produced cubs, so they left behind the gene. So the effort that the department, Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, put to rescue and put this into this confinement, spending a lot of money, did not go waste because it has served the conservation purpose. So that was a new, again, I would say, in the new frontier perspective, it is a new frontier because many such countries are looking for this. Even today, as I speak, there are issues in Rajasthan, Mukundra Tiger Reserve. So Ranthambore is a high-density areas, but we need to look at newer options. Same goes for Odisha, both the Satkosha and Sayadri Tiger Reserve. There are a lot of troubles. So it's all now happening. So where we need to look at new situations. So this is an excellent picture that anybody wants to see in terms of Panna, because when we release the animal, and this is what happened. So seeing a tiger recover, it's a beautiful thing. And not only that, when you're able to understand its growth. So these animals, even though we monitor intensively, there always been a problem because there can be infighting, there's an issue. Of the 4 cubs, only 2 survived, and 2, both males, and in fact all 4 males, 2 males, and grew up nicely. You can see this. And later on, this is one of the cub is dominant now. In fact, it's almost now 12 years. The father has been kind of displaced slowly, but without any aggression. He's been accepted by all of them, but they are not evicting him fully, but they have taken over. So even already there's some territory fights and everything started happening. We already lost a few animals because of the infighting and things like that. So this should explain everything. Starting from 2009 to 2020, the growth has been excellent. I nowhere else you would see a large carnivore recovery like this. The very steady and stable growth, and except a year in 2017-18, where there was a mortality of adult that took place, which basically brought the tiger population to down. Okay, and some animals got dispersed. So at the same time, you have few animals die and few animals got dispersed. But then, as a population, you can see constant growth. So we're talking about all the 3 different the kind of indications like lion and bar. The green one indicates the animal that have been brought from outside. These are founder animals, reintroduced animals. The blue bar indicates the population growth. The yellow is basically within the tiger reserve. So which I said, some death as well as dispersion, but then it's again population is about 50. So this is how the total recovery of Panna has happened. I think it's probably one of the fastest tiger recovery anywhere in the world. Originally, we started looking at 25 tiger as a carrying capacity, but meanwhile, there's some more space been created. I think the carrying capacity has to be reworked, and now the spilling over already started happening. Animals are dispersing. So you can see this whole history where we started from 1982 when the whole sanctuaries and things happened. Then in between, some village relocation program happened and population estimation. The crash happened. Then tiger population is growing steadily. I think it is again pertinent to make some statements. Okay, fine, everything is looking good and all this inspirational. But what is the take home for us? What actually made it possible? Is there anything that as a professional to gain from? Yes, there are things that one need to keep, even though people generally tend to overlook this. But what I strongly feel is these strategies, lessons, and implications have to be kept in mind. One of the things that I even stated in the beginning, any conservation program, anything for that matter, needs to be institutionalized. It cannot be individualized program. So in this case, the state of Madhya Pradesh owned the program, and with the chief wildlife warden, wildlife director talking to each other, having a coordinator at the headquarters of the state, and have different team working with a clear strategy, and the National Tiger Conservation Authority overseeing it. It's an ideal institutional mechanism. And it is available now. Even today, it is available. And that needed to be actually seen in the letter and spirit. If you do this, I think you have a lot of fallback mechanism when there's a difficulties and when there's a support mechanism when you needed to move forward. And have a clear species recovery strategy. This is a recovery plan one needs to really have. This is more like a roadmap. This one has the details of what you need to do before, during, and after, and what are the different scientific processes, monitoring process one must follow, and how do you actually look at your phase 2, and what are the situations that will happen in the future within, even with the small founder, inbreeding, and all that. Having a species recovery plan is, I would say, is a must thing to have. Intensive monitoring. So as I said, post-release monitoring is actually an indicator of what you're actually doing. So here use two situations. One is involving the people of the forest department, what we call them security-based monitoring, 24/7. And you have researchers who are actually providing the technical support and monitoring scientifically. It's a nice blend of science and management. So I always believed the technology transfer, the sooner you do to the department or the conservation agency, the better for conservation. So this is what we actually did in Panna. The technology transfer happened too soon, and we were able to succeed in making sure the ground team was stay put very strongly with the technical know-how, and continuous monitoring happened, because of which they could predict tiger movement, predict the breeding, predict the outcome, everything. So since then, they have not even lost any animal just because of poaching or something, except one case where there's a cage, some of the snare was set up for one other animal, the tiger got killed. Other than that, I think this monitoring is, even today, any given point in time, there are 10 tigers which are radio column being monitored, which will now end with this tiger recovery strategy. The situation will move into a new form of conservation management. Elephants are very useful in central India because you can search animal, you can try to trap animal. So they have an excellent resource in terms of monitoring. Other thing that lessons that come from this experience is that even though when we do tiger recovery program, we have elaborate facility as to what we need to do, where we need to set a soft release facility. But the clear lesson is that the soft release facility does not really matter. Animal will find its own home range wherever you release them. So it's a paper that we could publish, and it is clearly the case. And similarly, we also knew, see, many of the time when we talk about tiger, we say one tiger versus 2 female, 3 female, all this home range calculation. But in reality, each female, it's not just only the male that looks for choices. Even the female has choices. So some of you who understand the physiology or the details about the cats and canids, felids and canids, they have an excellent mechanism called induced ovulation. The female can control ovulation depending on who she wants to actually breed with. Even though she may be involved in false mating, but the tigress will decide. So that basically allowed us to understand in such a tiger translocation program, we also needed to show the mate choice even for the female. So tiger translocation and then for subsequent monitoring also helps. So animal could actually naturally disperse, and it also showed us the connectivity where all animal could go. So many of this option that we currently have is coming from this knowledge that we gained over a period of time. And when animal is moving around in the landscape, we could also pick up what are the important parameter that these tigers look for. So even when they do long distance movement, they look at basically the landscape variables. Okay, the forest cover generally follows the forest cover with some terrain, but try to avoid human dominant landscape. But at short distance, they don't mind, so they can just manage any of them. But in the long distance, they really look for this forest and terrain. So these are some of these lessons that we could do. And as I said, tiger can find its own home, and it is not a problem. But if you don't provide adequate cover, even in the enclosures, so they will probably find whatever it is available. Here, there was a case, not enough cover, but it only had the mango tree, so tiger could go there. But it needs to also find its own space. When animal is being monitored too closely, It also got disturbed at one point, or even those people say it's homing instinct. To me, it's more of a closely following this animal. You can see this graph. It moved about 250 kilometers, in terms of the linear distance. Actual movement is 442 kilometers. It's not very uncommon, but large carnivores do move long distances. But what exactly happened was it is follow this the forest cover, and initially it moved a very little, 3 kilometers per day, later 7.5. So maybe this is an area where it got really disturbed, started moving forward. So these are some of the big lessons that we could actually have. So tigers generally, when we translocate them, they take time to settle down. Once they settle down, they occupy and defend the territory. So it usually, we thought 4 to 6 weeks time is when they actually take to explore. The female take, kind of slowly and steadily. Female then travel fast and settles down. Once they make the home, they don't change much except for some season where they need to adopt or locally shift. Other than that, they make the choice very clearly. So we also feel that Panna is a blessing in disguise because of the history. It was probably continuous landscape with tiger mixing from one area to other. But when this got fragmented, then they all become insular population. So we could actually, bringing these animals from different population, we could recreate the genetic makeup that probably what could have been in the past. So this is hypothetical, but it has got its valid reason. Being a disconnected population and having individuals from different sources, we're kind of mixing them. So even if you look at generally the tiger heterozygosity, you usually expect them to 40 to 50%, but in this case, it's more than 60%. Okay, so which is really a good, I would say, percentage. The expected diversity even goes to 72%, 73% rather. So we also knew that, in terms of, as I said, these animals do not generally kind of mate with the same animal. They are also very conscious of the genetic diversity. So as I said, the female, even though it was mating, but it did not produce children, we could actually check this through a paternity analysis. They had avoided anything close related. They selected the male or female, which is slightly distant. So maybe that is the way to check the inbreeding depression by the female. So this is where the female makes a clear choice as to who she wants to. So those sneaker animal, which is in the transient animal, they actually get to reproduce. So we also knew that when the population is moving, the whole area is available now. From the small area to landscape level strategies have to be thought. So otherwise, while we have now made a lot of effort for the tiger to recover, but the tiger population reaches the carrying capacity. If it goes outside, if it gets poached, so it's more like your breeding house for poaching. It should not be the case. So therefore, the landscape context becomes very crucial. So currently, this is the thought both at the government level, at the institutional level. So maybe due to some other opportunity, we are now having an opportunity to develop landscape level management strategies for this area. So which basically will also increase the tiger number more. So we started talking about 100, but I think the whole landscape probably can go to 150 tigers. So we thought earlier we started talking about 30 individuals. That was a Panna. But I'm now talking about 150 individuals in the landscape if we can manage to secure them, and maybe more. We also felt when we talk about connectivity all over the world, everywhere in the country, we say connectivity is important, but one needs to understand why is it important? What is it important for? So even if you have a structural connectivity, it's not that all the animals are going to go. So the connectivity is again a function of dispersal ability of an animal. If a male tiger can walk long distance, so it will be connected. Whereas the female, even if you have connectivity, it will not walk. So maybe we have to have a relook at this whole connectivity business and come to more practical thing. Maybe it is useful for other animals, but overall we need to look at this one. This particular picture explains the ability of tiger decides the connectivity. You run a model. If the animal is not able to disperse more, so this is a kind of thing. Short distance, if they do, you will get a broken one. If animal has a more ability to walk, then obviously the entire landscape looks connected. Because small disturbances will be overcome, animal will actually be able to travel. The other important thing, again, as I said, another new frontier was when you looked at this recovery in Panna, it was a grand recovery. But Sariska was still an enigma. It was avoiding. I mean, we were not able to figure out. It took a lot of time for tigers to recover there. So one of the things that we actually could go into details is that to find out what could be the physiological mechanism that basically makes it. So the stress hormone, reproductive hormone, became one of the new way to look at tiger recovery. So we could actually demonstrate. One of our colleague, Dr. Umabadi from CCMB, is also from ABC College, our senior. So he was pioneering this work, trying to demonstrate, the stress hormone. Then he demonstrated that, Sariska tigers are more stressed than Panna, and similarly, the females are more stressed than the males, because if the females are more stressed, it affects the breeding. So therefore, the reproductive outcome is suppressed. So, in a nutshell, I would say that Panna Tiger Reserve, as an example for active tiger recovery, is a remarkable story. As such, it's a turnaround for the Tiger Reserve itself. People have taken it as an inspiration story because of every steps. Then you have something to learn. I think Sariska has this one experience, but Panna has multiple experiences, starting from wild and captivity and recovery, and sneaker animals and so many things. So it is a remarkable situation that we are now in, and people are both in India and outside taking Panna model as one of the useful model to emulate. But moving beyond, where does this whole conservation of big cats leave us? So globally, if you look at mammalian reintroduction, it's there all over. I mean, you can trace back this history into 1920s, where people have, even with viverrids, people started, beavers and things like that. So, but then the density of those things you would find in North America, where there's a lot of reintroduction, because from the beginning there have been a lot of experiments, but in India it's not much. So now we are doing it. But what actually going to serve the purpose? As you see in the statistics, 1973 when we had 9 tiger reserves, so 2020 we have 50 tiger reserves, but we had 500 tiger reserves in the tiger reserve, basically 500 tigers in tiger reserves, but we have more than 3,000 in 2020. So this is how we have been able to recover in the current situation. I like to point out here, many of the tiger reserves also have low density. Many have broken. Many have lost tigers. Suppose if you try to reintroduce tiger, recover them actively, either by natural colonization or by translocation. Some of these examples are here. Sanjay Tiger Reserve, Madhya Pradesh, Sai the Tiger Reserve, Maharashtra, Satkosha in Odisha, Mukundra in Rajasthan, Baksa, West Bengal, Rajaj in Uttarakhand. We will probably add more than 200 tigers easily. Not only that, we will also restore 5,000 square kilometer forest. I think these tigers also serve this kind of purpose. When you say 5,000 square kilometer, we're talking about a whole lot of biodiversity. So the whole, the way we look at it, I mean, I'm not even talking about technological interventions in this whole big cat conservation. That is another one that is happening when you actually see it from the perspective of the All India tiger population estimation, where it involved camera trap, a new methodology, and we also started using drone, things like that. But securing habitat is the primary goal, primary accomplishment. If you're able to ensure, you're able to ensure many biodiversity. So through this, the new activity that we call, active recovery program, we should be able to increase not just tiger number and also consolidate the species. But then conservation is not just an easy game. Okay, local extinction can be mitigated maybe by active recovery effort, but it is expensive. But if you really wanted to avoid it, you need to find out the problem from the beginning and remove those so that we continue to survive. But then in the current situation, we can only do efforts based on what we have. So if there are population, lower number, population, no population, functional extinct population, we probably have to do this. But when you look at the whole issue, I mean, I've been involved in this program for the last 10 years in many sites. What I also learned, tiger conservation also, the big cat conservation in general, also has a lot of politics. Politics between scientists, politics between conservationists, politics between scientists, conservationists, politics between the people. I mean, there's a whole lot of issue that you come across. So it has to be carefully implemented. I always believed one thing. So recognizing this politics, individual aspiration, if you really want the success to be done, so we need to find our space and maybe make sure it happens rather than letting it slip and to be done by people with vested interest. So as much as we talk about conservation science, but when it comes to actual field conservation, there are a lot of things that we need to understand from the local culture, whether it's administration, whether it's the local people, on the resources, economics, and politics. Even George Schaller very succinctly put the statement, which I always quote: conservation is to do with the culture, economics, and politics. It doesn't say science, but science has its strong backing. It goes without saying. That's because he's not mentioned. It doesn't mean that science does not have play. We have seen it clearly in all these places. Science will play a role, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that culture, economics, politics play a major role too. So with this, I like to conclude my talk. So thank you so much for the organizer, and thank you so much for all of you listening to this. Welcome to Panna. It's a beautiful place. You saw initially the picture is different. Now it's different. So it gives you different color in different season and different motivation. So I am thankful I've been able to be part of this and continue to provide whatever service I could do. So thank you once again.